Huh? It's 5:05 and welcome in to a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Continuing our coverage of a devastation left by Tropical Storm and Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina, Governor Roy Cooper and the FEMA Administrator Criswell provided an update at the Asheville Regional Airport yesterday on recovery efforts in western North Carolina. Criswell highlighted the deployment of more than 3,400 federal responders. That includes an additional 1,700 members of the National Guard and 1,500 Department of Defense personnel. She emphasized FEMA's complex response effort, including delivering supplies to many areas that were completely isolated and disconnected, seemingly from the rest of the state. Looking at what was discussed as well, Army and other military personnel on scene discussing the military's role with over 3,300 forces, vehicles, and aircrafts still assisting in search, rescue, and supply missions. Those are running almost round the clock. Additional engineering teams have been mobilized to help clear roads and deliver aid to portions of the state. Cooper noted that the number of missing people continues to decrease. That's obviously a great sign. And door-to-door checks are being conducted to confirm the status of individuals that still do not have power, over 100,000 in the state, and no access to cell phone service or internet connections to call out. Over 50 water systems remain damaged out in about a 13-county area to the west, and as you can imagine, tourism is being discouraged to prioritize recovery efforts. That's going to be a big thread to follow as western North Carolina sees a huge increase in tourism and is a large driving part of their economy. Both Cooper and Criswell addressed continued criticisms about FEMA's effectiveness, assuring the public that aid is reaching those in need. Over 104,000 people have registered for FEMA assistance, with $31 million distributed so far. Criswell urged residents to apply for aid. With that, FEMA, who told us last week that they were out of money, that's according to Alejandro Mayorkas, well, they are going to have to gear up because Florida is absolutely in the crosshairs of Hurricane Milton as that continues near the Yucatan Peninsula this morning as a very strong Category 4 hurricane. For North Carolina, really no major impacts. Rough surf will be likely along the East Coast starting midweek and through early parts of the weekend, but that is the only impact here in North Carolina. We'll continue to track Hurricane Milton and its impending impact on Florida. And again, the big question is going to be, what does FEMA do? They claim they were out of money after Helene, and this storm, which has got its eyes set on the Florida West Coast, is likely to leave major damage. We'll track that right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 5:08 News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Portions of western North Carolina still dealing with the impacts from Hurricane Helene. Early voting begins 2 weeks from Thursday. The election just 28 days away. And the question is, what is voting going to look like in the western half of the state? Brianna Kramer with the Carolina Journal joins us this morning to recap a State Board of Elections meeting yesterday. Brianna, good morning to you. What is the latest that we're learning from state officials this morning?
Hi, Nick. Good morning. The North Carolina State Board of Elections voted unanimously on Monday to pass a resolution that modifies election procedures for 13 counties that were hit hardest by Tropical Storm Helene. So North Carolina law allows for the board to exercise emergency powers to conduct an election in a district where the normal schedule for the election is disrupted by a natural disaster. So while all the County Board of Elections offices are now open, they've reopened across North Carolina following the storm, many communities are still facing damage to facilities and inadequate resources. So they've made some modifications for voting to deal with election infrastructure and voting sites that are damaged.
I was listening to the meeting yesterday, and I was amazed to hear that all of those county board of election buildings are not only open, but as you noted, operational. With that, of course, mail service still disrupted in a lot of areas. There's still hundreds of thousands of folks that are without power. What are some of the modifications that the state board approved, and what is that going to look like for folks out in the West?
Yeah, so there's been site modifications, early voting changes, changes to absentee ballots, and then election day and poll worker changes. So the counties, those 13, I'll read them to you: Ashe, Avery, Buncombe, Haywood, Henderson, Madison, McDowell, Mitchell, Polk, Rutherford, Transylvania, Watauga, and Yancey. Those counties have been authorized to modify their early voting plans. So that's amounting to 40 different early voting sites. So by changing their voting sites, they can also change the number of days a site is open, the hours of operation, and then they can actually do all this without the approval of the state board now. So the modifications to the number of hours and then also to participate in early voting should be minimized. So they don't want too many changes, of course, but if they have to make some changes, they're now allowed to, since the board voted on Monday.
We're hearing from the board director, and Karen Brinson Bell. She says that they're committed to opening all of early voting locations on the 17th out in the western half of the state. That's the first day of early voting in North Carolina. Did they seem to think that they were ready to go to begin opening those sites coming up next Thursday?
Yeah, they say that on October 17th, next Thursday, when early voting begins, every single county in the state is expected to have at least one early voting site open through October 17th all the way through Election Day. So they are planning on moving forward even through these hard-hit areas of North Carolina. I also heard earlier that every county's local postal service is reportedly functional. So of course they're having issues getting to some mailboxes in people's homes. And so there's an issue with reaching certain areas and delivery, but every post office is apparently able to send and receive mail in these 13 counties.
Keeping that thread on the mail side of it, absentee ballots, of course, are what most folks would be receiving through the mail. There's also some changes for those 13 counties in regards to absentee ballots, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So voters are able to deliver their completed absentee ballots to another county's Board of Elections in North Carolina. So that's not typical. Usually you'd have to deliver that in your own county, but now they're able to deliver it to any other county in the state as long as that ballot is received by the statewide deadline of Election Day at 7:30 in the evening. So these counties will be required to report absentee ballots received weekly, and that will enable the tracking of the ballots that will then be transmitted to the original county.
One of the other things that looks like it was changed is that voters in these affected counties will be able to request an absentee ballot up until the day before the election. That's a little bit of a change. The deadline is a couple days before for every other resident, right?
Yes. So they can request it all the way up until then, and they can also deliver it to, an expanded amount of locations, their county offices, and then, of course, the other counties as well. And so that's a change. But, I was able to speak with some people very familiar with North Carolina election laws, and they actually weren't concerned. They think this is pretty typical. Actually, it goes far beyond what the General Assembly did after Hurricane Florence in 2018. But no concerns I've heard of for these modifications. And so no election irregularities. They did not give absentee ballots a deadline extension as well. So that was a good thing to see. So no concerns that we're hearing about as of now.
You can read more on this story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. 5:13, now 5:14 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at your Tuesday morning commute. Boomer on Cannon's got the latest in traffic.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're in great shape.
connected.
The Brett Winterble Show.
This afternoon at 3.
News Talk 1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
Hot. It's 5:21. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Also streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube page. Well, with Election Day just 28 days away, early voting starts a week from Thursday. The North Carolina State Board of Elections voted unanimously yesterday to modify election procedures in 13 counties that were affected by Hurricane Helene. These counties, as you can imagine, in western North Carolina, face challenges like damaged facilities and ongoing disruptions to infrastructure, including the Postal Service and potentially voting locations. As a result, the board has expanded voting procedures, allowing these counties to adjust early voting sites, days, and hours without state approval. Though changes to available voting hours should be minimal, the resolution also enables voters in these counties to request absentee ballots up until the day before the election and submit them to any county board of election or state board office across the state. To assist with election operations, emergency election officials can be appointed, and aid will be provided to those affected counties, including temporary facilities and generators if need be. The state is coordinating with emergency management to support these efforts. Board members emphasized their commitment to ensuring accessible voting despite the disaster, with a focus on logistical support for those impacted areas. A very productive meeting for the Board of Elections yesterday. The North Carolina General Assembly will gavel back in tomorrow morning on Wednesday. We'll see if they take up any additional actions in regards to voting. But at least from yesterday's update, things seem to be going, I'm not going to say very well or smooth, but as good as they can be in regards to the devastation and destruction out in western North Carolina. With the General Assembly set to gavel in tomorrow, what kind of money does the state have in its reserves? North Carolina currently has substantial reserve funds for disaster relief, with over $733 million in the State Emergency and Disaster Relief Fund. Plus they've got an additional $4.75 billion in savings reserve. That's general fund savings there. These reserves have grown significantly since 2013. That's when Republicans took control after almost 100 years in the North Carolina General Assembly. Democrats had gotten those reserve funds to almost nothing. The state's fiscal position allows it to respond effectively to disasters like Hurricane Helene, contrasting that with FEMA's reported shortage of funds. Lawmakers are working on a federal relief package, and the state will release additional funds for relief in the coming days, weeks, and months, and potentially even years as western North Carolina continues to deal with this devastation. We'll track the General Assembly session tomorrow at carolinajournal.com. North Carolina's cell phone wireless tax rate in 2024 stands at 9.12%. That's significantly below the national average of almost 13%. The state's tax rate has seen only minor increases, remaining relatively stable since 2022. Nationwide, wireless taxes have risen steadily, with the average wireless tax and fee rate increasing from 15.5% in 2003, ballooning up to almost 27% in 2024. This increase is due to rising state and local taxes, as well as surcharges from the Federal Universal Service Fund, which has grown to 34.5% in 2024. Despite a decrease in average monthly phone bills, taxes and fees now account for a larger share of those bills, contributing to a growing burden on wireless customers. And as we saw over the last couple of weeks, well, the use of wireless internet, whether that be mobile hotspots on cell phones or services like Starlink, have been absolutely vital to communications and recovery in North Carolina when traditional forms of of communication. Landlines, hardwired internet were completely inaccessible and remain inaccessible for weeks and months to come. You can read more on that story at carolinajournal.com. We'll chat with Katie Zender about that coming up here in just a few minutes on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 526, Governor Roy Cooper and the FEMA administrator provided an update at the Asheville Regional Airport yesterday in regards to the recovery efforts that do continue in North Carolina. Governor Roy Cooper talked about the resiliency of residents and the state as a whole.
We know that there is much more to do. We're still opening roads. We're still working to reach communities. We still have search and rescue occurring as we speak. But we know the people of North Carolina and will pull together, and that the people of Western North Carolina will recover from this storm and will work to be more resilient than ever.
That resiliency effort does continue this morning. Power outages do continue to improve. The number's still over 100,000. We also learned from Governor Roy Cooper that over 50 water systems in the western half of the state remain at some level of damage. They're not completely destroyed, and all of them are not completely inoperational, but that is likely going to take some time as well. We then heard from the FEMA administrator about the ongoing efforts that continue from the federal standpoint, as there has been much criticism levied at the federal response. Chris Well, who is the head of FEMA, talked about that federal support.
I have seen and I have led complex events. This is a complicated event, but let me be clear, FEMA is good at complexity. Our team, we are coordinators, we are collaborators, we are problem solvers, but we are also part of a larger team. And so I am grateful to be surrounded here today by my partners from the Department of Defense who are so committed to helping us support this mission. And together we will be here with North Carolinians as long as it takes.
That was the FEMA administrator talking about dealing with complex events, talking about the support from the federal government, which has been largely criticized by many folks in North Carolina. She then went on to talk about the current federal support and where that stands in the state.
An event of this size requires significant support, and it requires that support from the entire federal family. I have been coordinating with my counterparts from all of the different departments and agencies to make sure we're bringing in what we need to support this community. I have engaged with their senior leadership, and to date, we have brought in nearly 3,400 federal responders from across the different departments and agencies to North Carolina.
That's FEMA Administrator Diane Criswell. Yesterday at the Asheville Regional Airport, they highlighted the deployment of over 3,400 federal troops, 1,700 members of the National Guard, and 1,500 Department of Defense personnel as those cleanup efforts continue. And, well, FEMA's got a lot on their plate. Hurricane Milton is looking to ravage portions of the western coast of Florida. We'll see what the federal response looks like down there. 5:30 now, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Let's get a look at your Tuesday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're listening.
2024.
Presented by Kraft Body Scan.
Visit WBT.com for details.
You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you at 5:36. We continue to track recovery efforts in western North Carolina. This story getting national attention as Governor Roy Cooper and the FEMA administrator provided an update yesterday at the Asheville Regional Airport on the recovery efforts that do continue in western North Carolina. Criswell highlighted the deployment of over 3,400 federal responders, as well as 1,700 members of the National Guard and 1,500 members of the Department of Defense. She emphasized FEMA's complex response efforts, including delivering supplies to areas that have been completely isolated. Looking at the military role, there's more than 3,300 forces, vehicles, and aircraft that are assisting search, rescue, and supply missions. Those are continually running around the clock in the western half of the state. Additional engineering teams have been mobilized to help clear roads. This is going to be critical as crews from power utilities and others folks try to get out to some more remote areas and begin the process of restoring things like water, sewer, and electricity. As those engineering teams are there, they're also helping to deliver aid. Governor Roy Cooper noted that the number of missing people does continue to decrease, and door-to-door and wellness checks are being conducted. Over 50 water systems remain damaged over about a 13-county area, and tourism is discouraged, as you can imagine, to prioritize those recovery efforts. Over 104,000 people have registered for FEMA assistance, with $31 million distributed so far, and Criswell urged residents to apply for that aid if it is acceptable for them to do so. We continue to track that right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. The election is 28 days away, and the North Carolina State Board of Elections voted unanimously yesterday to modify election procedures in 13 counties that were severely affected by Hurricane Helene. These counties face challenges like damaged facilities and ongoing disruptions to infrastructure, including the likes of the Postal Service and voting sites, as well as water and electricity. As a result, the board has expanded voting procedures and allowed these counties to adjust their early voting sites, days, and hours, and they can do that without state approval. However, changes to available voting hours is reported to be minimal from the state board. The resolution also enables voters in these counties to request absentee ballots up until the day before the election and submit them to any county board of election office across the state. To assist with election operations, emergency election officials will be appointed, and aid will be provided to affected counties, including potential temporary facilities and generators. The state continues its coordination with emergency management to support these efforts, and board members emphasized their commitment to ensuring accessible voting despite the ongoing disaster, with a focus on logistical support for those impacted areas. It's now 5:40 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. With devastation out in western North Carolina, communications has been an interesting thread to follow. Did you know that your cell phone bill is taxed here in North Carolina? Katie Zender from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the News Hour. Katie, I'm sure most folks, unless they've looked at a detailed copy of their bill, many folks probably have it on auto pay, don't even know that there is a tax on your internet bill here in North Carolina for cell phones. You've got a story on that this morning. What are the details?
Right. So, yeah, this is not only a tax here in North Carolina, but across the nation. And there is a new report out from the Tax Foundation that shows that on average across the nation in 2004, wireless taxes have gone up 8.8% on average nationwide. The interesting thing about this, Nick, is between the years of 2022 and 2024, wireless taxes have fluctuated across the nation and gone up and down. But North Carolina has actually remained pretty steady, staying at around 9% between those years.
And it is interesting that you mentioned that earlier number in 2004. A lot of folks had cell phones, but now pretty much everybody, I'm sure many folks listening don't know a single person that doesn't have a cell phone. This is becoming more and more part of our everyday lives. Why it's fluctuated in other states, you mentioned it's been the same here. Any reason for that? And what's the current rate in North Carolina compared to some of our neighbors?
Right. So in North Carolina, the current rate is 9.12%. The national average is at about 12.82%. It's interesting because if we look at the numbers from the Tax Foundation, in 2022, the state rate was at about 9.4%, and then in 2023, it went up to 9.05%. So it just barely went up. And then this is really interesting that it increased in 2003 because the rest of the nation actually saw a slight decrease in 2003, whereas North Carolina saw a slight increase, although very, very slight. And yeah, so according to the John Locke Foundation's fiscal policy analyst, Joseph Harris, he says, the reason for this, the fact that it has remained relatively not been adjusted for a significant period of time. And the tax on telecommunication services and ancillary services have been about 7% since 2005. And the 911 service charge has remained 65 cents since 2018.
When we look at all those different charges, unfortunately, tax is a part of our everyday life, whether we're shopping at the grocery store or, in this case, using our cell phones. Is there any idea as to this rate? Is it going to stay the same? Is there an appetite from lawmakers to maybe increase it, or is it something that just kind of happens behind the scenes and it's not something that's really ever talked about?
So it's really interesting because if we look at the data from the Tax Foundation, there has been a steady increase since, I believe, 2003 to 2022. There's been a steady increase in wireless tax services. Another factor that affects wireless taxes is there's something called the Federal Universal Service Fund, which is a charge that the federal government charges to wireless service providers, and they can choose to put that surcharge on customer bills. So I'm sure, many, if not all, customer wireless service providers do include those surcharges on customer bills, and that has actually increased from 2000 when it was about 5.5% to in 2024 it's currently at 34.4%.
As we look at all these numbers and as more and more folks not only have cell phones, but many folks have it as their only means of communication, and this is a fascinating part of it, Katie, as more and more folks rely on this for their everyday connectivity. As you look at around the country, is this conversation really being talked about in any other state, or is this just kind of, again, something that flies under the radar?
Right, Nick. Yeah, I think that this is something that really flies under the radar. I haven't seen a ton of coverage about this in other states or, nationwide. So, like I said, the Tax Foundation puts out the data on this. They've been doing these reports every year. I think this is their 14th or 15th report. But yeah, we really don't see a lot of coverage on this.
When we look at cell phone bills as a whole, this tax, while it is a small part of it, bills on everything seem to be going up. Where does the current bill stand in North Carolina? What is the average consumer paying for their monthly cell phone bill?
So I can't speak specifically to North Carolina, but nationwide, it's dropped from 47 to about 33.65 a month since 2012. But that is offset by the increase in taxes, which have jumped from 17.2% to about 26.8% of the total bill.
When we look at those state and local taxes, where does that money go? Does this just go into the general fund, or is this used for things like you mentioned, 911 services and vital communications like that?
Right. So a lot of that, about $3.8 billion in state and local taxes, goes to 911 and 9.988 fees.
Where can folks read more details and check out a map of where these percentages are across the country?
Yeah, so they can read all of this information in my article on thecarolinajournal.com. And we have all of this data linked from the Tax Foundation. So if they want to dig deeper and find out more information, all of that data is linked there as well.
Katie, thanks for the time. 545 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Let's get a look at your Tuesday traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. And West
connected. Pete Kaliner, today, noon to 3. WBT.
Your emergency situation station.
Huh?
5:52. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on WBT. 28 days ahead of Election Day, and where do things currently stand in North Carolina? Well, you'll have an opportunity to find that out next Thursday outside the Charlotte area. The Carolina Journal is presenting their October poll presentation dinner at the Jesse Helms Center. That's happening Thursday, October the 17th, 5:30 to 7. Join Donna King from the Carolina Journal and Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation as they will discuss their latest Carolina Journal poll presentation. That's the first day of early voting. Tickets are available now. Again, the Jesse Helms Center, Thursday, October the 17th. You can visit johnlocke.org for more details. That's johnlocke, LOCKE.org. 5:53 on the Carolina Journal News Hour as the federal response to Hurricane Helene continues to be a top conversation. Well, now Florida is in the main conversation as Hurricane Milton is expected to leave devastating impacts across Florida's western coast coming up in, parts of late tomorrow into early Thursday morning. And with that, it appears that politics, unfortunately, has become a top conversation. Yesterday, Kamala Harris claimed that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was playing politics and being selfish in regards to the federal response. He responded to that on the Sean Hannity show last night. Well, take a listen.
An even bigger storm that's bearing down, as you pointed out, on a very populated area, potentially could do even more damage. And we've been laser focused on leveraging all resources available, including from the federal government. And I've been in touch with both FEMA and the president, as well as marshaling all our state agencies and working to support our local communities. And so for Kamala Harris to try to say that my sole focus on the people of Florida is somehow selfish is delusional. She has no role in this. In fact, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. I've dealt with a number of storms under this administration. She has never contributed anything to any of these efforts. And so what I think is selfish
Has she ever
is her
called
trying
before?
to blunder into this. No. And here's
Has
the
she ever
thing.
called before?
She has no role. No, she has no role in this process. I'm in contact with the President of the United States. I'm in contact with FEMA director. I'm obviously managing all our state agencies. We're supporting all our local government. And I will say this. I've had storms under both President Trump and President Biden, and I've worked well with both of them. She's the first one who's trying to politicize the storm, and she's doing that just because of her campaign. She's trying to get some type of an edge. She knows she's doing poorly, and so she's playing these political games. I don't have time for political games.
That's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, as you can hear, pretty heated last night on the Sean Hannity program as the response, the federal response to natural disasters, it first started here in North Carolina starting last week as that portions of our state dealt with the impacts of Hurricane Helene. FEMA now claiming they are out of money for the remainder of the hurricane season. That was before Hurricane Milton, which continues as a very strong Category 4 hurricane as of this morning, is expected to impact the western portions of Florida and move completely across the peninsula coming up throughout the middle and latter parts of this week. Congress on their front, they claim that they are ready to step in, but not until that there is an actual dollar amount. We heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson over the weekend. He was on Fox News Sunday discussing the need for more money in FEMA, and he made it very clear to the host that until there was an exact dollar amount that was needed, Congress would not be moving forward with additional funding. When that dollar amount was there, when they could express exactly how much money they need and what they were going to use it for, well, Congress would step in and do their part. Turning our attention back to North Carolina this morning as we talk about the upcoming election, there have been it's been allowed that 13 counties that were affected by Hurricane Helene will be able to run somewhat modified elections ahead of early voting starting next Thursday. These counties face challenges like damaged facilities and ongoing disruptions to infrastructure, including the Postal Service, voting sites, water, and electricity. As a result, the board has expanded voting procedures, allowing these counties to adjust early voting sites, days, and hours without state approval. However, they do note that the available voting hours and the impact on that should be rather minimal for folks out in the western half of the state. The resolution also enables voters in these counties to request absentee ballots until the day before the election and submit them to any county board of election office anywhere across the state of North Carolina. We'll continue to track that. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. You can keep up to date with everything that we're tracking over at carolinajournal.com. We're back tomorrow morning starting at 5.